Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ariel Sankar-Bergman. I'm a program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and it's truly a privilege to be with you all today in community as we come together to discuss and reflect on how we can better understand income inequality. We all know that the issue of income inequality has been with us for a long time. Families and communities across the country are struggling to keep up with the cost of housing, healthcare, childcare, education, and even groceries, while wages have remained largely flat. At the same time, we keep hearing that GDP is increasing. But when we take a closer look, we can see there's a clear disconnect. The economy may be expanding overall, but growth is not evenly distributed. And that gap between the numbers and people's lived experiences is what we're here to discuss today. That's why I'm really excited about Equitable Growth's Inequality Tracker. It's an interactive tool designed to give all of us, whether we're researchers, policymakers, journalists, advocates, or funders, a clear view of how economic growth is evenly distributed across US households. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is deeply invested in evidence building across disciplines that are critical to advancing economic inclusion as a foundation for family well-being. We see tools like this as essential for helping guide solutions that give families a fair chance to thrive. What makes this tool especially powerful is the way it breaks down sources of income. It doesn't just look at wages, but it shows at things like rental income and business income, as well as government transfers, giving us a much more complete picture of what's really happening. Already, the tracker is surfacing some really important stories. For example, if you look at the Gini coefficient, income inequality hasn't shifted much in the 21st century. But the tracker shows us something different. Households in the bottom 50th percentile and the top 10 percentile, or in the top 10% of income distribution, have experienced the strongest growth, while households in the middle and upper ranges, the 50th to 90th percentile, have seen weaker income growth. Another example of the nuance that's revealed by the tracker is that if we look at the bottom half of households, income gains are increasingly coming from in-kind transfers like Medicare and Medicaid rather than from wages. By understanding who is and isn't benefiting from economic policies and supports, we can better direct our efforts to shape solutions that ensure that all Americans can get ahead. Today's webinar will give you a behind-the-scene look at why the Washington Center for Equitable Growth created the tracker and how it works. Our speakers will also walk us through the methodology and then demonstrate how tools can be applied, whether you're shaping policy, conducting research, or reporting on these issues. I'm delighted to help the Washington Center for Equitable Growth introduce you to this tool, and I know you will find it as useful and eye-opening as I have. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin Clemens, the economist who designed the tracker, who will demonstrate how to use the tracker to discuss some of what it reveals about inequality in the US, and then, of course, have time to answer your questions.
All right, thank you so much for that intro. I'm going to jump right into this. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes here, and then we're going to have 20 minutes for me to take your questions. So please do feel free to submit questions to the Q&A as we go along, and I will try to get to as many of those as I can at the end of this brief intro. All right, so let me jump right into it. I'm going to introduce you all to the Equitable Growth's U.S. Inequality Tracker. And let me start by sharing my screen so we can take a look at it together. So maybe you've already taken a look at this a little, but this is what the tracker looks like. And I'll just give you the kind of quick sales pitch up front, which is that this is a tracker for both income and wealth inequality in the US. It gives you a lot of different views into how income and wealth have evolved over the course of the 21st century from 2000 to 2023. And it breaks both of those concepts down into categories, into streams of income and streams of wealth that I think can be really useful for understanding what's going on in the US economy. I'm going to focus mostly on income today. And part of the reason for that is I think probably people who are attending this event are probably a little more familiar with the wealth side of the equation here, right? So for wealth, we are using the distributional financial accounts from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve already has some really nice visualizations of that data, but we're doing a slightly different cut of that. We're showing some slightly different things that I think are interesting. I think that data set has appeared in the news a lot already. It's been analyzed quite a bit. And so I'm going to not focus on that so much today. Instead, I really want to focus on the income side of this, because on the income side, we're using this data set from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the distribution of personal income, that I think people maybe aren't as familiar with and haven't had as much experience with. And so I want to show that to you all and give you a sense of what that data is, where it comes from, and what it can tell us about the US economy. All right. So let's actually start there. I'm just going to show you real quick. This is BEA's webpage for the distribution of personal income. And let me start with a big picture question, which is, what is personal income? It is a national income and products account, right? So like GDP, it's part of the aggregate NIPA accounts that BEA tracks. And it's different from GDP in the sense that it is all streams of income that flow to households. And so, it's maybe a little difficult to imagine how to disaggregate some of the income concepts we have in GDP. So BEA made the wise choice to focus on personal income. It's a very comprehensive definition of income that includes things like in-kind transfers, includes things like employer-provided healthcare, so on and so forth. One important thing it doesn't include is capital gains. We can talk about that in Q&A if people are interested. But I want to show you real quick, this is BEA's portal for it, and I want to direct your attention to a brand new product that they just put out. This is not included in our tracker because it doesn't have enough detail, but it's their national nowcast. And the reason I want to point this out to you is because this is a really useful tool, I think, for contextualizing GDP growth. So as Ariel said at the top, we don't just want to look at aggregate GDP growth and say, well, the economy is good, the economy is bad, right? We need some context for that. Who is the economy growing for? What kinds of households are benefiting most from the current economy? And this product is going to give you a lot of context on that. So I just want to real briefly show you this third column here. This product is going to be released in January of 2026, and it's going to show you annual growth for 2025. It's going to be released around the same time as annual GDP growth for 2025. And so it's going to be a really useful product for lending some context to annual GDP growth in 2025. Now, growth in personal income in 2024 was about 5.6% in nominal terms. It was very similar to GDP growth. But you can see that across the distribution, there's actually quite a bit of variation, right? So the first quintile, this product only does quintiles, and the full product, we have deciles, saw growth a little less than half of that aggregate. Gets a little better in the second and third quintiles. We see the real sort of winners of 2024 with this kind of upper middle income group, which saw growth quite a bit higher than the aggregate. And then this last group that's kind of like right bang on the average. So this is a really cool product. I really encourage people to, we're going to look at a bunch of it today because it's related to the Inequality Tracker, because it's the data we're using. But I really encourage people to explore this more. Equitable Growth works with Congress to help BEA get resources to create this data. BEA did phenomenal work. I think they've wanted to have something like this for a long time. They created similar statistics in the 50s, believe it or not. And so this is the coming together of a lot of different things to create this data series that is not just a really neat new way for us to think about inequality in the US economy, but is a place where our statistical agencies are leading on the international stage. It's very rare that other countries have this kind of data and that they have it in such a timely way. So this is a really unique and very cool, frankly, for the data nerds out there, very cool data series that we have access to. And I hope this presentation gets people curious about it and gets people thinking about it. All right, so let's pop back over to the tracker. I should say this tracker is going to be updated at the frequency that we get income and wealth updates. For wealth, that means quarterly on something like a 2-quarter lag. Right now, there's a little problem with Fred where they're not updating some of the distributional financial accounts. So I'm trying to get an answer from them about that. So the wealth is a little behind where it should be right now. The income distribution is updated once annually by BEA in December. So this December, in about 2 months, we will get data for 2024, the previous year. And that's very granular data. The neat thing about the full data release is that, I just showed you those quintiles that we're going to get in January, which is cool. But in the full data release, we're going to get deciles of households. So we get 10 buckets representing, the lowest 10% of households, the lowest income 10% of households, up to the highest 10% of households. And not only that, but we get it broken down by types of income. So for each of those deciles, we can see what's happened to their wage income, their transfer income, assets, business, and rent. All right. So it's really a rich data set with lots of interesting cuts you can do to see what's happening to people's income in the US. So this will update in December when BEA releases that update. All right, so let me just walk you through some of the views into the data we can do here. You can see that the kind of primary toggles here are looking at different income groups over different years. And I'll pop down here and just show you the first graph, which is a cumulative look at income growth for a group you selected over a specific time period. So right now we're looking at the bottom half of households in the United States. And these bars represent cumulative growth from 2000 all the way to 2023 for that group. So you can sort of see, just looking at the bar and in the tooltip I have here, that the bottom 50% saw their incomes increase by 72.5% over that time period. About half of that came from growth in transfer income that they're receiving. About a third of it came from growth in wage income they're receiving, and the rest from other sources, much smaller. All right. And then we give you a little comparison over here on the right to some other groups. This is the lower 50. This is what we're looking at. This next 40 is the kind of, you can think of this as kind of the middle to upper middle class, right? So this is the 50th to 90th percentile of households. And finally, the top 10%. And then BEA also gives us an estimate for the top 1%, but they do not break it down by category of income. So that's why this top 1% bar doesn't have that category of income breakdown. I should probably also say, this top 1 group is being very affected by the exclusion of capital gains in this data set. All right, so you can sort of see the top line here over the entire 21st century. This lower 50 group and the top 10 group have grown very similarly. And we've seen some weakness in this next 40 group, the 50th to 90th percentile of households. All right. Now, we hope that people will find it useful to use this as a tool to think about different eras of the US economy in the 21st century. So, that's the picture for the entire span of time. But for example, maybe we want to look at just the last economic expansion from 2009 to 2019. So I can do that. You can see you get a very different kind of picture here, both in the composition of income growth for this particular group and in the amount of growth that different groups saw over this period, right? So we can use this to look at kind of different parts of the economy in time and think about that. We could look at, the economic expansion before that, and you'll see something slightly different, right? Very poor wage growth at the bottom of the distribution here, for example. All right, I'm going to kick us back out to the full time span view and show y'all the other graphs we have here. So the second view of this data we have is the composition of this group's income over time. So in this view, you can just get a sense of, how has this group's how have sources of income for this group changed over time? And what you'll see in this bottom 50 group is that there's been a shift from receiving about 60% of their income as wages to now something more like 50%. And a lot of that difference has been moved to transfers, basically. And so this group has seen their share of income as transfers move up, and their share of income as wages move down. And over here, again, we have a comparison to other groups. Okay, that next 40 group is very dependent on wages. And the top 10 group has a very diverse portfolio of income. All right. The third sort of cut of this data we have is looking at year-over-year growth and comparing it to both GDP and to personal income growth generally. Now, this first graph that compares it to GDP, this is a little apples to oranges, admittedly, but we wanted to give you that sense, that context of, when you see a GDP number, how different is that from what people in households are actually experiencing? And so the blue bars here are telling you that this group we selected, the bottom half, outperformed GDP. And you can see in the tooltip, we give you the actual numbers. So GDP grew 1% in 2001. Personal income grew 4% for this group. So they outperformed GDP by 3 percentage points. Again, it's a little apples to oranges, but they're both NIPA concepts, and it gives you a sense of, when we report a GDP average, how are we representing different groups and the whole country? How is that different for some of these households? All right, so you can look at that over time. And then down here, we have that same comparison. This time, the comparison is to personal income. So this is the apples to apples comparison, essentially. If this blue bar here is saying that this group outperformed the entire distribution, the red bars are saying they underperformed the entire distribution. You'll see here maybe a pretty common pattern in the data, which is that lower income households tend to outperform a little in recessions when they often receive transfer stimulus, and tend to underperform a little bit in expansions. All right, let's jump over to the last one. This one's real simple. It's just showing you the share of income that this group has earned over time in the US economy. So again, looking at this bottom 50%, they've had an average just under 21% over the time period. They currently are earning about 21.3% of all personal income. So this group hasn't changed a great deal, but it's moved modestly up over this time period, what we would expect based on the first graph we were looking at, right? Let's look at those other groups. So here's the 10th decile. Okay. And you can see what's happened here. So average right around 38%, currently looking at a little over 39%. So this group has is about 1 percentage point of personal income over their longer run average in this period. I should say, these might seem like small percentages, but moving 1 percentage point of essentially all income in the US around is pretty significant. And then since those two groups are doing a little better, as you might suspect, if we look at this upper 40 group, they're doing a little worse over this time period, right? So this group has averaged a little better than 41% share, and they're now down around just under 40, okay? So I only have a little time left. Before I turn it over to questions, I want to kind of investigate this question using tools in the tracker. Why has this group in particular seen their share of income shrink and seen their growth in income be a little weaker than others? I have a much longer treatment of this in a column on Equitable Growth's website, but I'm going to give you the kind of Cliff Notes version right now. So let's pop over to composition of income. And as I teased earlier, this particular group is highly dependent on wages. In fact, they're more dependent on wages than any other group is on any one source of income, right? So you can even look at just the first decile. They do not get 74% of their income from transfers. Okay, they get a big chunk of their income from transfers, but not as dependent as this group is on wages. So this group has seen a little bit of change, right? They've gone from about 81% of their income coming from wages to about 74% of their income coming from wages. And so there's like kind of two questions here, why has this group performed poorly? And also, why have we seen this shift to transfers? Well, if you look at the evolution of their income, you might start to kind of see it, right? You can see what looks like pretty normal kind of growth for this group up through the Great Recession. You can see constant steps up in their wages, a little slice showing that they have some transfer growth, but most of it's coming from wages, as you would expect from a group where most of their income is from wages, right? But then they take this huge hit to wages in the Great Recession. And in fact, don't really recover until sometime between 2014 and 2015, right? Like that's when the labor market really started working again. That's when this group and other groups really started to see robust wage gains again. And then you see some recovery over this period of a strong labor market and a little leveling off at the end, maybe. Okay, so this is giving us some strong hints. I'm going to switch real quick to some slides I have and just show you a little more of the story. So this is what I basically just showed you, right? Which is that as you go up in deciles, you see an increasing share of income coming from wages until you get to the 10th decile, where you have a very diverse portfolio of income, right? But these upper, so we're talking about the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th deciles here, these upper middle class group deciles, they get a huge portion of their income from wages. And just doing some non-distributional analysis, so literally just looking at BEA's personal income aggregates, I pulled out the compound annual growth rate for each of these components of income over this time period from 2000 to 2023. And I think you can now see pretty clearly why that upper 40 group has suffered a little over this time period. It's because wages have not really grown at the same rate that other types of income have grown, right? So wages have grown the slowest. You can see transfers are growing quite a bit faster. And so now you might be asking, well, is this just because transfers are growing at an extraordinary rate? So I have one more graph to show you, which is a comparison of the 21st century to the 2 decades before it, the 80s and 90s, and the 60s and 70s. And so again, we're looking at compound annual growth rates. So I realize these are not even spans of time, but it shouldn't matter here. Reasonably, you might ask, well, do these start and stop years? They seem arbitrary. Like, do these affect things? You can pick different end and start points, and you will not get a very different picture. So what you can see here is that wages have grown at a very weak rate compared to previous decades. And I don't have this picture here, but you can go read it in my fuller analysis. Wages in the 90s and 80s and 90s grew in a very uneven way. I think we know that, right? Wages in this century have grown very evenly, actually, but poorly for basically people across the income distribution. Some changes in other ones. I wouldn't read too much into the differences in assets, right? A lot of that is about whether the stock market favors dividends or not. And then you can see that the transfer growth we've seen in this century is not really unusual. It's very similar to the rates of the 80s and 90s. If we had had wage growth for these deciles that was similar to what we had in the 80s and 90s and evenly distributed, importantly, then we really would not have seen this shift from wages to transfers. Okay. So I think, this is just an example of how looking at these components and thinking critically about these components can guide you in thinking about how inequality in the US has evolved over time. All right, I am out of time, so I would love to see some questions from people. Please go ahead and ask your questions, and I will try to address those as they come up. All right, I have one question. Does this data control for age composition changes, an aging population? Is there a way to look at these metrics for, say, just working age folks? So we don't have a any kind of real age adjustment in here. I will say the economist at BEA, Marina Gandelsky, who produces these statistics, also has a working paper from, I want to say 2021, where she looks at this question of intergenerational shifts using other data. It's not really possible in BEA's product that we can see. But she has some details there on that. All right, and then I'm seeing somewhat similar questions from Connie Citro and Chris Regaber here, so I'll answer those together. So Connie's asking if we can pick out healthcare from the transfer category. I wish we could. We can't, Connie. So if you look at personal income in aggregates on the BEA website, you will see that like Medicare and Medicaid are broken out. And so we can think about like, you know, have Medicare and Medicaid increased as a percentage of total transfers in personal income? I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, right? One thing that's really important to keep in mind with these is that, you know, when we talk about allotting an in-kind transfer like Medicaid, what we're essentially doing is we're just taking the price that the government pays to provide Medicaid to one person and adding it to someone's income. All right. So if it's like $7,000, $6,000, which I think is roughly in the right ballpark, we're just adding that to someone's income, right? Now, that's obviously not money they can spend, but it is money that, or it is a service they're being provided that they otherwise would have had to have bought, right? And I think, you know, I think the reason Connie's asking this question is because we know that health, you know, prices for healthcare in the economy have risen faster than other prices. And so even if we don't have new transfer programs at the federal level, that could drive up transfer income purely from the mechanical effect of healthcare prices increasing quickly. So unfortunately, we don't have that in a distributional way, but you can get a little sense of it by looking at what's happened to the aggregates in personal income. And Chris Regaber asked a similar kind of question, which is, you know, do we have additional context about the sources of transfer income? And again, you know, we can infer a little by looking at some of the personal income aggregates on BEA, but we don't have it in this distributional data per se. Okay, another question. You mentioned capital gains is not captured. How does the lack of capital gains distort the picture? So I have a short piece about this on the Equitable Growth website, where I borrow some data from the economist Jake Robbins and his team, who have been researching sort of these metrics questions around putting together a capital gains, a distributional capital gains series. And what you find out is that basically not having capital gains means you're understating the rise in top 10% share of income by about 5 percentage points, which is pretty significant. So, you know, we see in this data that the top 10% has elevated their share by a percentage point and change. If you add capital gains, it's actually closer to something like 6 percentage points. That's very similar to what you see in, for example, the Congressional Budget Office's distribution of income report, where they report about a 5% increase in the share of income that is going to the top 10% where they have capital gains data. So to be sure, inequality has increased a little more than this picture is giving you. And it's important to kind of have capital gains in the back of your mind, especially for the top 1%. All right, a quick one. Will you be able to access the recording after this meeting? I believe the answer is yes. All right, and then I have from Damone Daniels, how granularly can income wealth percentiles be disaggregated within these data beyond the 50th and 90th percentile? So we can do anything within deciles, right? So the BEA data is essentially 10 decile buckets. So you can use the tracker to compose your own groups. So, if you want to look at like the middle 40%, that would be like the 4th through the 7th deciles, for example. You can do that. We can't break out of those boundaries, right? So I can't tell you what's happening at the 95th percentile or something. But we definitely have some of that. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Chris. Right. So if you wanted to get something close to cash income, so if you want to get close to cash income, right, probably the best thing to do is actually to look at the Census Bureau's annual poverty report. So, that was kind of that's the money income view of things. They're just looking at the CPS. That number has some problems. In particular, so it does what you want, Chris, which is that it does not include in-kind transfers, right? So it's a little less comprehensive. But it's also missing some stuff. And so, one of the things BEA does is, in some sense, that's what they start with, is census's money income definition. And one of the things BEA does is they try to account for underreporting of transfer receipt, which is a common problem in the CPS. So, census is probably underreporting at the bottom. And then the bigger problem with census's money income concept that you find in the poverty report is that they're vastly underreporting things at the top. And that's because the CPS doesn't do an incredible job of capturing very high incomes. And that's one of the really important adjustments that BEA makes, is they use IRS statistics to try to include more high incomes. So I don't know, this is not a great answer for you, Chris. Like, it's a little difficult. We can't just exclude in-kind transfers from BEA's distributional data. You could maybe, again, try to look at some of the PI aggregates to do some estimates, but I don't know that you can do it exactly. All right, let me get Gabenga Aguilar. So he asks, I don't know if I missed this, but can this tool do geographic breakdowns? I'm particularly interested in seeing rural-urban differences. So this particular tool doesn't do geographic breakdowns, but BEA has another data set that the name is going to elude me right now, but they have another data set that does look at within county composition of income. All right, now you can't really do distributional comparisons within counties. I will say also, it can be very fraught to do distributional comparisons within geographic areas within a country. Like for the US, that often just ends up looking like a map of population, right? It's one of those things where when you have big population centers, New York City, right, it's the most unequal place in America, simply because you have, great concentrations of income there. So we don't have a distributional breakdown, but you can do things like compare transfers and wage composition of income between different counties, between different states. That is data that BEA has. We've actually written about it a little bit at Equitable Growth. and some other people have too, when you look at that data, you actually see sort of an interesting complement to the story I just told you, which is that in cities, you do not see this shift to transfers as much. And in rural areas, you see an even stronger shift to transfers, right? And so this kind of like, transfers encroaching on wages is also an urban rural story. Thanks for that, Kavinga. Okay, someone wanted to ask about, or someone asked about inequality metrics over the next 3 years and what we might see. So, I hope that this tool is coming at a really timely moment for thinking about inequality, right? One thing that you probably saw in what I was presenting to you, right, is that we have that bottom 50% that has actually grown a little more reliant on transfers, right? And as I mentioned in the longer piece I wrote, like a lot of that is coming from in-kind transfers as well. And so there's already kind of reason to worry about welfare for that bottom 50% because they're seeing a move away from cash income and towards kind of in-kind services, right? And that has a variety of disadvantages. You can't save services, right? You can't spend it on the things you want to spend it on. So that's already a weakness in their income base, even though the growth looks quite good. And now, of course, we're about to have pretty dramatic cuts to a lot of transfer programs, and in particular, things like Medicaid, which was really the big expansion in the welfare state over the past couple decades. So that's going to really erode incomes at the bottom. And I think what that says about growth, I don't know that I want to make a prognostication about growth per se, because there's a lot of variables that go into that. But I think it means that you might see disconnects between aggregate growth and the distributional picture. And so I would once again just really urge people to check in on that BEA Nowcast that's going to be released in January of 2026. That's going to allow you to, give some context to what's happening with GDP growth. And we might not see huge differences next year, right? Like we really haven't seen huge policy changes due to the current administration in Congress yet, and they're not really kicking in this year, right? But starting in 2026, we will start to see some significant policy changes and some significant, I suspect, significant changes in the underlying distribution of growth. Thanks for that question. All right, this one's a little long. Let me get my head around it. Okay, so Adrienne Nesta asks some technical questions. Is there a reason the time span is restricted to a minimum of 5 years? Yeah, so there is. We could relax this restriction easily, and I'd encourage you to write in. There's a contact form on the website if it seems like something we really should look at. The reason we have a minimum of 5 years as the time span there is because if you look at really short spans of time, you get into this problem where like the growth is very small, so the denominator is very small, and so you can end up with very strange looking graphs where maybe the growth the growth for a group was only like 0.5%, and you end up with something crazy like 120% of that was because of transfers and negative 119.5% of that was because of wages, right? And so you can have these like weird denominator problems over small time periods. And so purely for interpretability, we put that kind of restriction in place. And then he has a question to piggyback off the questions about breaking down the sources of transfer income. Do you have thoughts of how the increase in transfer income post-COVID, especially from the first to fifth decile, might be different than previous increases of transfer income? So, I will say post-COVID, right? Uh, I think the changes you see are actually not as dramatic as they look in some ways. It's important to remember that most of the COVID transfers were temporary, right? And so if you look at some time span that includes COVID, what you're going to see is this sudden surge in transfers that then drops off after 2 years. Um, it does look very different from other periods of time in U.S. economic history, simply in the sense that we've never had a surge of transfers that large, frankly. And so it looks very different. But if you kind of compare the pre-COVID composition and post-COVID composition of income, I think you'll see that most of that surge was really not permanent as it, might have been. There's actually more of a case to make here for the Great Recession, where you see a shift to transfers that kind of sticks around. All right, so we'll have to see what happens over the next few years, but certainly we're expecting further decreases in transfer income. Thanks for that question. I'll do this one as a quick one. David asks, does the rental income category include imputed rent for homeowners? Yeah, it does. So that is a BEA concept that goes into, basically all the NIPA concepts think about imputed rent for homeowners. So this can be a slightly tricky concept for people to wrap their heads around. It's definitely a significant income support to households that own houses as opposed to renting, right? And you might have seen from some of my slides that rental income behaves strangely in this period, right? Rental income is very high in this period. That's sort of a mark of current housing scarcity. And so that is something to keep in mind, I think. All right. Janelle asks, are you worried that this data series might be discontinued by the current administration? I'll just say there's no reason to think that that's true. This data series doesn't depend on any exotic data collection. Really, it's basically the CPS, SOI tables, and some supplementary data that BEA is taking in from smaller sources, and then some simulation and some imputation. All right, so I have no reason to believe that this data series would be impacted beyond whatever whatever problem CPS might have due to reduced budgets. I will say, I think that's something to monitor, that BLS is seeing some reduced staffing right now. But it shouldn't affect this data series. And then the other thing I'll say is that just the best way to protect this data series and the best way to sort of make sure that BEA continues to produce this is for people to start looking at it and thinking about it and using it, right? If it has a constituency, then I think that will really make BEA feel like that this is something that they need to keep producing. If for whatever reason it suddenly gets discontinued, we'll certainly notify people of that on the tracker. Appreciate that question. Okay, another question from David. Since these cohorts are not static, can you combine your findings with other work on economic mobility to estimate, for example, how many people in the bottom 50 in 2001 are still in the bottom 50 in 2023? Yeah, so again, no, you really can't, right? This is not a mobility data set, right? This is a slice, this is a cross-sectional slice of income data set. And so, we're looking at the households that happen to be in the bottom decile right now, right? Not necessarily the same households that will be in the bottom decile next year or 2 years from now. Those are very different kinds of analysis, right? I think it's very useful to have a cross-sectional data set like this, where you can look at just how the distribution is changing, right? Like that's really the way you think about inequality, and you think about, is growth delivering for different slices of the population? That's very different from asking about mobility. I know sometimes people argue that these cross-sectional looks aren't quite as important. I think that's not true. I think they just ask different analytical questions, right? But we cannot really think about mobility for this. And similarly, Melissa asks, is there a way to get insights into distributional data by race and gender? Similarly, we don't have that yet. I'm hopeful that at some point BEA will think about adding that kind of granularity to the data. They have been adding a lot of granularity over time, and also increasing timeliness, things like that. So this is very much still in development. But I will say, again, I mentioned this 2021 paper that Marina Gendelski put out. And I wish I had the journal off the top of my head. I don't. But she actually does a little analysis of this question of how race and gender interact with this. So it's certainly possible, right? Like the household data that they've constructed would allow this. It's just not something that BEA is pursuing in the public data set right now. All right, I'll answer maybe one more here. I think we're getting towards the end of questions. Do you have plans for future pieces of content highlighting income and wealth inequality trends? Absolutely. I think Equitable Growth wants to use this to think about where the economy is headed, where we've been, and update people's priors about what's going on in the economy. We might be primed for some big changes in 2026, in 2027, so on and so forth. And so I think people have maybe become a little jaded talking about income inequality. In part that was because we had really strong stimulus in the last recession. We had a really tight labor market, right? That was delivering for a lot of people. Those are no longer really the circumstances we find ourselves in right now. We have a tight but kind of weird labor market, and certainly looks like we're about to have government policy that runs in the other direction, right? And so I think this is going to be something to really pay attention to and look to in the next couple of years. All right, I will just mention that once the webinar is over, people can submit other interests, questions via a survey that we're going to direct you all towards. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Equitable Growth's president and CEO, Shana Strom. Thank you so much for the great questions, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Austin, for that thorough and helpful presentation. And thanks to Ariel for joining us today to help introduce a tool that I hope all of you will find useful on an ongoing basis. Over the past decade, the Washington Center for Equitable Growth has been working to better understand the interplay between income and wealth inequality and overall economic growth, with the goal of advancing policies that ensure growth is strong, stable, and broadly shared. Our work to disaggregate macroeconomic data to provide policymakers and the broader public with evidence on who benefits when the economy grows, otherwise known as GDP 2.0, has blossomed into the U.S. Inequality Tracker we introduced today. Although we saw inequality take more of a backseat coming out of the pandemic recovery and the economic growth during the Biden administration, we're now seeing a return to regressive policies, such as the president's big tax and spending law passed this summer. So now is exactly the right time for those of us in the policy world, philanthropy, media, and academia to shine a spotlight on the connection between income and wealth inequality and its relationship to growth. With your help, we want to get inequality and growth back in the conversation. We're going to be reporting on stories we see in this data and framing our work around the goal of equitable growth for households across the income distribution. We hope our inequality tracker will be a valuable resource we can all use to see how the economy is performing up and down the income ladder. It's not enough simply to have a growing economy. It needs to grow for everyone. Thank you all for joining us today.